deploying applications on-premise. Next, we're going to be looking at deploying applications on-premise. We're going to use Anypoint Studio to create a deployable archive that we could pass off to a server. We're going to install the standalone Mule runtime on our machine. We'll talk and modify a configuration file called wrapper.configuration. We'll start the Mule locally. We'll also start a management console, something that will allow us to gain visibility into our mules. And we'll use the Mule management console to deploy the application to the Mule server, all of these pieces running on our machine. So let's get right into it with this walkthrough. Deploying an application on-prem. We'll package an application as a Mule deployable archive, start the Mule runtime in MMC, deploy an application to an on-prem Mule runtime, and then finally run the application. Let's get started. First, let's start off inside of Anypoint Studio and export our application. Of course, before we do this, you may want to make sure your application is saved. In this case, we can see that the application is saved on my machine. We're going to go to the File menu, and from File, we'll go down and export the application. Now, inside of this export dialog, we're going to expand the Mule category, and we're going to find the Anypoint Studio project to Mule deployable archive. Think of this kind of like a package that not only could you send to another developer to open up in Studio, but also one that you could package to be deployed to a server. We'll go ahead and click Next, and it will basically ask us where we'd like to deploy our application to. Feel free to deploy it anywhere on your machine. Just remember where you've deployed it to so it's easy to access later. For now, I'm going to go ahead and put this in a servers directory on my machine. And the name of the file, again, is trivial, at least for this initial use case, but I'll keep it consistent by calling it apessentials.zip. And of course, keep in mind you can also use the Browse button here to find the location you'd like. Attach project resources is going to allow us to attach the kind of meta information, the project sources, in case you want to import that into Studio later. We'll keep that checked. It won't hurt anything in the long run. And then we'll click Finish. Now let's look into the server itself. In your student manual, there was mentions of needing to download the server runtime for this class. And the runtime package, although the folder might have a different name, inside will have a couple folders, in particular two that we really care about. One is the management consoles folder, while the other is the Mule runtime itself, both of these giving us what we need to get started. Let's go ahead and open up the Mule Enterprise folder just for a moment. Looking inside of this Mule Enterprise folder, we can see, especially if you're familiar with a server technology like Tomcat, it's got a pretty standard directory structure. Now, one of the first things that we're going to have to do together, primarily because we're using Data Mapper inside of our application, is to bring the Data Mapper plugin into the server before we initially start it up. So let's do that now. We're going to go ahead and open up a browser and download the plugin to bring into the server. To download the plugin, we're going to head to mulesoftt.com/dm-plugin.zip. And then we'll hit enter. This will start the Data Mapper plugin on your machine, and we'll expand that Data Mapper plugin once it's finished downloading. All right. Once you've located your plugin download, what we're hoping to do here is to bring the particular version of the server we're using in. Now, this video might be dated by the time you watch it, so you might have a different version. The key thing to keep in mind is once you unzip the DM plugin and open it up, you're going to find that there are potentially multiple versions of the Data Mapper plugin. In this case, notice that I've got the Mule-Enterprise 3.7.1 runtime, which means I want that respective plugin. I'm going to take this zip plugin and simply drag it into the server's plugins directory and drop that right inside. Now the Data Mapper plugin is going to be part of the server, ensuring that all of our Data Mapper pieces will work when we're running the server. Now let's talk a little bit about the configuration. Like we mentioned in the slides, we do want to configure this in such a way that the properties file that we've set up earlier is in fact set. So inside of our Mule Enterprise server, if we go back from the plugins directory, we'll open up the configuration directory inside. Now inside of the configuration directory, you'll see a couple different files for logging configs and things of that nature. But there's one master file inside of here that's going to be extremely helpful to us, and that's the wrapper.conf file. Let's go ahead and open up the wrapper.conf file in a text editor. Once wrapper.conf is open, let's go ahead and add in our own property settings to make sure that our application's properties will be respected. Now, as you go through this properties file, you're going to see some information about different properties that are already being set. As you keep going down, you'll see things like garbage collection settings and the like. And then as you start to get about a quarter or even less than a quarter down the document, you'll notice that everything else is commented out. This is basically like a self-documented file that you can go through and read and see what all these different settings do. Now, right under the last setting for GC settings, we'll add in our own. We'll drop down and take note that inside of GC settings, you can see these numbers. In fact, in all of these commands, you can see these numbers that are incrementing, basically telling the wrapper what order these different commands should be fired off in. So ours is going to be 15. So we'll go ahead and we'll take the wrapper Java and just copy and paste it, make sure we don't make any errors. And we'll take out 14 and replace it with 15. Now, obviously, our setting is much different than what we've got here, so we'll remove this GC setting and we'll add in a -d Java parameter. Just like we talked about in Studio, we want to make sure that the env value for our property file is set to dev. This way, our development properties are loaded in this particular server. You could see how this would be beneficial, especially as you go in and deploy to different servers. Contextually, the server could potentially be aware of what environment, if you will, the server is part of. So we'll go ahead and save this up, and we'll exit out of this text editor. Now we're going to see if we can start up MMC. So we'll go back a few directories, back to our main server bundle that we had unpackaged. And inside of here, we've again got the MMC directory. So in a similar fashion, but in a different command window, I'll keep my Mule open over here on the left. Okay. There we go. I'll open up another command window and try to do the same thing with MMC. Now, if you open up the MMC directory, you'll notice that it's got an instance of Apache Tomcat inside. So MMC is just a war that one could run on an application server. I'll open up Tomcat and see that there are everything from bin to conf to lib to logs. I'll go into the bin directory and I'll attempt to start up the startup script. Now, Windows users, you're going to find a batch script, and Mac users or Unix-based users, you're going to find a startup shell script. So obviously use the respective one to your system. So in this case, you may need to open up a command line and navigate here, but in short, you want to run this particular startup. Now this will likely be pretty quick. You might get a pop-up if you're on a Windows machine especially, where it starts to kind of compile the war and get everything set up for the server to run, but it shouldn't take more than a minute to get set up. In fact, now we should have a server that's ready to go. Let's see if we can actually get into this server from our web browser. Going back to the web browser for a moment here, we're going to try to go to localhost 8585 rather. Okay, so localhost 8585/MMC, and then the version, so MMC-3.7.1 in this case. If your version is different, obviously respect that. In fact, I think in our case we're at 3.7.0, excuse me, so MMC-3.7.0, and hit enter. And if all goes well, you'll actually get a login screen, okay? So just to put it in perspective here, I'm going to close this window in a moment, but we've got our Mule running in the top left, and we've got MMC's startup right here in the bottom left. Now I'll close MMC's startup because it's not going to tell us a whole lot. But the Mule will be running back here, so we can kind of see the relationship as we pop back and forth. And this screen will be pretty small. Don't worry too much about what's inside. I'll just show you when these two interact, the change you'll see inside of here. So we'll start off by logging into MMC. The default username is admin, and the default password is also admin. Inside of MMC, let's click on the Servers tab, and inside of here, you're going to see some information about potential servers that MMC can hook into. Now, it may depend on your environment, but there's a possibility you'll actually see an unregistered server, and this is likely the Mule you've already got running. Don't worry about this unregistered server right now. I'm going to show you a more guaranteed way to hook a Mule into MMC, but again, I just want to make you aware this could possibly have a Mule inside of it. I'll go back to the All category and look into hooking in our server. So we can go from All Servers and go to Add, and choose to add a new server. from the new server dialog, we have the ability to choose a server that we'd like to add. So let's assume that this is Max the Mule, and we're going to hook Max up to the management console. You'll notice there's also an agent URL inside of here. This is where Max is potentially exposed to communicate with MMC. Be aware that this can of course be changed, and the file, just like we saw before, would be the wrapper configuration where you could change this. For now, we'll keep everything as is and hit add. In MMC, if you look to the left here, MMC is actually communicating with Max. In fact, towards the top here, and I'll make this just a bit bigger so it's a little bit easier to read, for a moment, Max let us know that it was paired with MMC, and the communication had actually begun. So the Mule is now talking to the management console. And inside of the management console here, we've got all the different dialogues and all the different settings. In fact, we've got access to Max now, and we can go inside of Max and we can see different details about Max. But most importantly for this module, we want to get you deploying an application into this server. So let's see if we can accomplish that right now. Right from MMC, if we click the Deployments tab, we can then go over and click New. Now we're going to be creating a new deployment. Pretty simple. We just need to say what the deployment will be and where we want it to go. So let's call this deployment AP Essentials to be consistent with that of our application we've been developing. Let's go to the Applications area and upload a new application. Now what I'll have you do here is browse out to the location you exported your application to in the previous walkthrough. Once you've located your app, you can simply open that up right from this import dialog. And you're going to see inside of here something along the lines of C. You may see fake path. Have no worry if that's there. That's actually expected. And then the name of the application. Let's now hit add. So basically we're saying there will be a deployment called AP Essentials. It will contain an app called AP Essentials, and it will go to some destination. Now to specify the destination, let's drop down the servers drop-down list, and let's choose Max inside of here. Once you've got Max selected, go ahead and click Deploy. Now flipping back to Max, we can see here that Max is starting up the application. There's some activity happening, new app AP Essentials. The app has then been started and successfully deployed. So now you've officially deployed an application through a standalone server and should be able to call this particular application. So we'll see if anything is actually going to work when we make calls here. And then we'll take a look at the logs to see exactly how this is going to happen. So what we can do is go back to our browser and just make a request like we would do before. So if we go back to 8081/API/console, we should in fact see the console. And do note that I'm currently not running Anypoint Studio, and you shouldn't be either. It should be running strictly out of the command line. Do be aware as well that if Studio is currently running the application, Max may have failed to start up the app, which is not unexpected. If your Studio is running and Max tries to open up on the same port, they're running on the same computer, so there will be a conflict. You might have to shut one down in order to start the other. But we can then go in here, just like we did before. We could see the API we've been working so hard on in class. We could request a destination like SFO and hit get, and it will go out and then get SFO flights for that particular destination right inside of here. So everything should be fully functioning just as we had set it up inside of Studio.